Today, we're in the beautiful Dorset town of Shaftesbury, most famous probably for Gold's Hill, which those of us who were alive in the late 80s will remember the Hovis advert with the little boy hobbling up the hill. Well, we're going to start at Gold's Hill. We're not seeing all of the town. It really is a gorgeous little town, right in the north of Dorset, almost in Wiltshire. But here's Gold's Hill, just round this corner. It's nowhere near as long as it was made to look by the two Ronnies or in the Hovis advert. To the left, we'll go there in a minute, is the Museum of Gold's Hill, which has a beautiful free museum of very small collection, but really gives a feel of this ancient town of Shaftesbury. And just to the right, further along behind these walls, is the old abbey, which, whilst completely destroyed, local history group has really done their best to create a feeling of what was actually an important abbey back in the day. It was created by one of Alfred the Great's relatives. He was the first abbess there. But first, we take a little stroll down the hill. Sadly, there's a bit of scaffolding on that building there. I guess by late summer it may have gone and you'll have an unobstructed view, and we do need to preserve these views. But it's hard to capture how beautifully picturesque this town is. It's perched on a hill, and flowing off into the distance are undulating hills. And the camera doesn't really get the depth of field, but it's beautiful. It's a really gorgeous little spot. Really reminded me of Shakespeare and the Sceptred Isle. It's the picture of Britain that he painted. You get down the bottom of this cobbled section, and you see that's actually Gold's Hill. Past there, it's paved like any old road, and it really does finish just round the corner. But it's a beautiful entry to Shaftesbury, a town where there's much Georgian and Victorian architecture and hints of much older building. At the top of this hill there's a hall which is 1826 to 1837. There is actually some other buildings which are much older there, and the churches are quite good examples as well, but I don't want too long a video. So we're going to just take a little look here, and we'll stroll back up the hill to the museum, which, although it's small, I was very impressed. It's about 6 rooms over 2 floors, and you can see that the volunteers have really put together a very decent museum. Here's Gold's Hill. This is not the Gold's Hill that you expect from the TV advert. Let's head back up. And you can see the beautiful cottages. If you remember the Two Ronnie sketch or the Hovis advert, you probably realise that what they did was shoot the same walk from different camera angles to make the hill look a lot longer than it really is. It certainly is very steep. And good shoes or a walking stick would be advisable if you have any limitation on your walking, because this is extremely steep. You can drive up it if you're doing a delivery. So it's not an entirely pedestrianised area, but I don't think I'd want to drive a car up here and turn it round at the top. You can see there's a lovely cafe with a picturesque view down Gold's Hill. And that seems to be where a lot of people were enjoying this sunny day. I think if you're coming into Dorset from London, you've headed from the south, and you go down this zigzag hill, it's called. It really is very zigzag. Then it's well worth coming into Dorset from this end. You get a very beautiful little town, which, because it's very much in the corner of Dorset, isn't as crowded as a lot of other towns are. Here's the Hovis loaf. It's not actually from the advert because the town was made so famous by it. It's been built as a charitable monument. You can make a donation. So we're inside the Gold Hill Museum. First thing you have is Alfred the Great, because this was in the Kingdom of Wessex. And there's a good section of history and explanation of Alfred the Great. He wasn't the first king of United England, but he was the forefather of it, and the only king to bear the moniker the Great. Here's a lovely selection of original and reconstruction. The brooch there's a reconstruction. Here's a Roman coffin for a child, which has been beautifully reconstructed. It was a lead coffin, or lead lined. And then ancient Neolithic, some good artifacts, some recreated items, explanation of the spiral patterns that are somewhere found in this part of the country. And if you've been to the British Museum, or if you've watched our video on the British Museum, you might recognise that mosaic down at the bottom there is actually in the British Museum. It's in the British Roman section. There's a small garden at the back, beautiful selection of flowers and bushes and shrubs, which very well maintained. It was a boiling hot day the day we were here, so it really was lovely to get a little bit of shelter. Although the sundial wasn't getting much sun, that wasn't a bad thing. And again, you get this beautiful view over the surrounding countryside, which you really have to come and see it. That's King's Hill in the distance. Here inside there's a beautiful quilted bed cover with items from the history of Shaftesbury. So we'll see that fire engine in a little while. That's the museum, the Hovis loaf we saw outside, cycling. The different churches, there's Church of England, Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, Quaker. There's a whole selection of different churches here. And that's the hall that's at the top of the hill, just behind this museum. Then through to a selection of items from the area, from scales and agricultural items. There's a smock and a shepherd's crook. A fascinating gravestone, I believe. And just a good selection of well annotated items from the Shaftesbury area. This is what Shaftesbury looked like years ago. And although it's quite different now, you can see hints of that in Gold Hill. Here's a lot of items from the agricultural history of the area, from sheep shearers and brass decorations for horses. This is engineering from the area. A cheese press, so you would put large cheeses that when they'd sat in a cool place and solidified, you have to squeeze the juice out of it, and that's one of the machines from probably the 19th century to do that. Large bellows, which would have been used by a blacksmith or at an iron smelting. And here are a large selection of shepherd's tools and pictures of a shepherd's hut, unfortunately not here. Upstairs, interesting selection of items from a festival that's held in Shaftesbury every year. It's the Byzant ceremony, celebrated every year since 1364, and it's taken on a ceremonial mace is carried from the hilltop, and it's to commemorate the supply of reliable water and to pay a tribute in terms of silver pennies and some bread and ale. Happens in mid-May or June on a Sunday. And the mayor and dignitaries and local people walk from here along an ancient route to Enmore Green, where they were able to use well water from there and pay tribute for that. There's a selection of items from businesses in the area in the past, including these beer jars, some school uniforms from the old girls' grammar school. And some lace. Long time since I've seen lace and bobbins. I think if you watch the Pitt Rivers video, we saw a large selection. But I do remember years ago going to Nottingham and making a very big fuss of their lace trade, which I've got to say the last time I went to Nottingham, it was like it had never existed. No one pushed it at all. Normally a town pushes its local trade as a piece of its history. A selection of iron, and there really is a large selection. I've been thinking of keeping your irons in the fire. If you're a professional laundry company, this is the device you needed 100 years ago. It had 6 irons around a fire, so you could swap them out and always had a hot iron. Then a selection of pottery that's been found in the area, not all made in the area. For example, that willow pattern, very much not a Dorset decoration. And there was a button making company that was here for quite a long time, and they have a history of the button company and a large selection of the buttons which they sold. They had hundreds of different designs and sold them to clothes manufacturers. And there's the plaque from the high school. There's a series of stuff for around the home. I do love the coffee grinder. I must admit I would like a manual coffee grinder like that. I always find the electric ones a bit problematic. I'm in a series of woodcut press decorations of designs of around Shaftesbury and explanations of the various buildings, printing, things that have gone on here. And they have an archive which you can view selections from. Some lovely photos of the town over the years. You can see just how much it's grown. But it's still got a very small town feel. It doesn't feel like a big town at all. Here, a serpent in the corner. That's sort of predecessor of the tuba and oboe. And a large format camera. I don't think I'd fancy the amount of time it takes to calibrate and take a picture with that. Then from the town of Shaftesbury, a drum from the band. Really beautiful, that serpent. It's very rare you see them. If you see our video on the Horniman Museum, I believe it had some good serpents. And there's a gramophone, but it's a gramophone from clay discs rather than drums, rather than a disc. Explanation of the serpent here, which links through to Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy called Shaftesbury Sefton in some of his books. And there is a selection of books you can buy, second-hand books downstairs. I did see a lovely copy of Jude the Obscure, was tempted to get it. It's probably my favourite Hardy. Although I've got to say I'm probably depressed enough without reading Jude the Obscure. Great as it is not a happy book. Then a selection of glass, pottery, clay, buttons. It's a regimental badge button. And some clay pipes, things that have been found around Shaftesbury. So these are iron shoe horses. Above, that's the slag from a iron smelting kiln. You get the offcuts, if you like, the waste that comes out. Then there's a kind of area here for children with a lot of toys and dolls and doll houses that they can either play with or that are protected by screens and they can look at. But some beautiful little doll houses there. And then some rooms from different eras. These are pieces of buildings from Shaftesbury, bits of wood left over from long gone buildings. And a squint hole. This hole apparently was so the priest could get a view of the organ, because this museum is actually in what used to be the Doss House. The Doss House effectively was a place where vagrants could stay. You have to bear in mind that there were very strict vagrancy laws, and if you didn't have a job, you had to find one or be deserving poor, or you risked being branded with a V as a vagrant, literally a red hot brand permanently on your forehead because you were in an area without a job. Here's a cat found in the wall. It's sort of a throwback, not exactly to witchcraft, but to old superstitions where a cat would be hidden, mummified in the wall. And the idea was that it would protect the house from vermin and mice. Interesting selection of items from the town. And the town crier's outfit. I'm not sure if they still have a town crier. I haven't seen one in a long time, but tourist towns do love to have them. And this definitely is a bit of a tourist town. Some items from the First and Second World War, the Home Guard badges there, series of what look like First World War medals. Beautiful little items. They're all very well noted. There's booklets with all the details of the local Dorset regiment. Old Bakelite TV. At the back, a selection of archaeological finds, mainly Neolithic and Bronze Age and Roman fragments of pottery. A little bit of Anglo-Saxon. This is very much an Anglo-Saxon stronghold. You think the first kings of Britain were descendants of the House of Wessex, which this was in. Beautiful old glass. Fragments of pottery. Quite well noted next to them. And the flints here, Stone Age flints, really good selection before the Romans. But as well as being noted on it, there is a booklet next to each cabinet which has very good explanation. Here, an old spinning wheel. You can see it's before the spindle, the foot thread where you would tap your foot. And that's what the hill used to look like. Kind of looks like that. This is the city class locomotives, which were, each one was named after a city or a town. And there was one, the Shaftesbury, so that's the details from it and a model of it. And here's a fire engine. This is the town fire engine. You'll see a very similar one if you watch our first video of the Science Museum. This is from about the 1850s. Yes, 1854. And you'd put water in it. You had a bar on either side that you pushed up and down, and that would pump the water. Now, just across from the museum, if you go just back up to the top of the hill, turn left and head along, you come to this beautiful open space. Behind the wall to the right is what's left of the abbey, or what was believed to the abbey. But we're going to soak up the view a bit here. Again, doesn't really do justice to how beautiful and quaint this is. But you have to come and actually enjoy it. There's a lovely lawn here, and you can walk along and you get a view down over Dorset. And way in the distance is the coast. That's not the coast behind those hills, that's just more rolling hills. But there's a beautiful valley here. Gold's Hill is to the left there. That's those set of houses you can see that curves up. That's where we were at the beginning of the video when we reached the tarmac section. And then we'll take a little stroll along the hill here. It really is well worth a visit. I'd say come in the morning before it gets too busy. Soak up a bit of the atmosphere of Shaftesbury, and hum the tune to the Hovis advert, if you can remember it. And then you can head down into Dorset, which really is one of the most beautiful counties in England. But a lovely garden here where you can soak up a bit of sun, take in the view, which is spectacular. And behind you, which is completely free as well as the other museum, is the Abbey. And we're going to pop in briefly to the Abbey and have a little look around. It's actually the remains of the royal nunnery, which was established by Alfred the Great in 888 AD. So, over 1100 years ago, King Alfred the Great founded this in Shaftesbury, and his second daughter was actually installed as the abbess. 6.5 centuries, the community flourished here, and the town of Shaftesbury really grew up around that. It is an Anglo-Saxon town surviving. As you drive through this part of Dorset, a lot of villages actually on the sign with the name say an Anglo-Saxon village. And this was an Anglo-Saxon town, the same. Here's a beautiful cross, not as old as it looks. It's actually the memorial for the First and Second World War. And there's the viewing platform, the gardens, where you get a lovely view over the valley. But we're going to head in to the left to Shaftesbury Abbey. And there's some good pieces on display. Sadly, it was completely destroyed in the Reformation. Henry VIII had this place razed to the ground. And it's only by digging down that they've actually found these fragments of the wall, giving an idea of what the layout was. And it's a lovely garden with flowers and plants and seating, along with some explanation of the layout and some markers where the door would have been. So this is where we would have entered the abbey. And then here would have been the nave. Down just before where the cross at the end is where the altar would have been. But really, most of the building's completely destroyed. And they've done a lovely job of reconstructing and giving a feel of what the layout was. You don't have a feel for the church, but definitely a great effort by the local history group who work here voluntarily to make sure that it's maintained and available for people. And this is where the old altar would have been. And back where the cross is, there probably would have been a chapel. There are a handful of structures. At the back here, you can actually see there's some steps down. But that's probably the most complete part of the abbey. And then to the side here is a more recent building. Back behind this kind of rockery is a statue of Alfred the Great. And it's good to see Alfred the Great remembered in Shaftesbury because this was one of his towns and he definitely had a large part in building the town of Shaftesbury and creating that legacy which still goes on today, where it's clear that the history is still respected and loved by at least a small selection of people who voluntarily work in the abbey here and the museum, offering a free view of the history of Shaftesbury. And I hope you've enjoyed our little tour of Shaftesbury and the two museums. We're going to go inside. Here's some pieces they've dug up from decorations around the site. But there is a small museum inside. And again, it's small, but it's very well annotated. Here's reconstruction of some shattered pieces of stone. Inside, you can see a series of carved stones from different periods within the church. There's some lovely late medieval tiles, reconstructed The statue, you can see where the statue was completely destroyed there. Some suggestion of what monastic life would have been like in the convent. And foods, beautifully decorated pieces of stone, some good photos and history, and an explanation really of how it was. Really well worth a little visit. Doesn't take too long. This is what the abbey used to look like. It was at the top of the hill, had its own grounds, its own fish pond, fields for growing crops, and really lovely little museum, which I would definitely recommend you come and visit too. So I hope you enjoyed our visit to Shaftesbury. Please do like and subscribe, and join us next week. We'll be going to more beautiful places in Britain and interesting museums that you may not have heard of. And I'll leave you with Alfred the Great in the Abbey.